أرحب بكم في هذا اللقاء المميز مع البروفيسور سي.كي. راجو راجو. وبترك الفرصة للدكتور منير في تعريفنا بأعمال الدكتور راجو وكتاباته. It's a great pleasure for us in سليمان الحلبي Circle for Colonial and Studies and Decolonization of Knowledge. And it's truly a great honor for us to have you among us today. So you are welcome. تفضل.
برضو شكرا شكرا للأستاذ خالد اللي رتب، الشباب اللي معه طبعا اللي رتب هذا اللقاء. تحدث راجو في جامعة بيت لحم، وتحدث في جامعة برزيت، وقعد يومين مع الشباب اللي في برنامج جامعة في المخيم في مخيمة هيشي، وبعض اللقاءات الصغيرة هنا وهناك. وأنا شخصياً يعني كل اللي بدي أقوله عنه إنه مهم جداً اللي بحكيه واللي بفكر فيه لسبب بسيط، لأنه إحنا كشعب فلسطيني دائماً بنحكي عن المقاومة، بنحكي على كل أنواع المقاومة، لكن مقاومة الرياضيات، الفكر الرياضي والفكر العلمي قاعد على جنب بيعمل كل شغله بدون ما حد يصيبه. برضه كمان بدي أقول إنه إذا في أي شيء بحكيه وحد حابب إنه أترجمه، يعني بس يرفع إيده حتى يوقف. إذا ما حد رفع إيده بدي أفترض إنه مفهوم، فعليكم العبء إنه تقولوا إنه بليز وقف، خلينا نعرف بالضبط شو اللي عم بحكي. Basically, I'm saying that we as Palestinians have lived a resistance life all our lives, and we resisted domination at every level, but we did not resist domination at the level of math and sciences. And it is about time that we include this as a basic ingredient in our resistance, in terms of our thinking, in terms of our actions, in terms of our perceptions of ourselves and others. Then I asked if there is anyone who doesn't, like understand something you said. I will then just raise their hand and I will translate. Only one comment that I really want to make. The concept and the word that I feel is very basic for us to heal from and to resist is the claim to universality, the claim to universal thinking. This to me is the basis of all domination, because when you really believe that something is universal, then the way we behave is we look at ourselves as less, because somehow we conceive ourselves as ethnic, as cultural, as whatever, but there is something universal which actually Europe and the West in general have captured. But somehow we have to really reach this universal thing. So universal thinking is one way of really, it is the basis of all domination, therefore it is one way we should really resist. And one way, in my work with young people, either here or in Teshe, to really resist the universal claims is to start with words. There is no word that has universal meaning. That means every one of us is a co-author of meanings, is a source of meaning. And I think that in practical terms, this is something we should practice at the personal level. Any word that comes in a universal package, we should rethink about it, either throw it away or redefine it in our own experience. So I will leave all the time for Raju to express what he wants to express. And hopefully, after Raju leaves, first we hope that he will come back again. But we can also, in between, before he comes back again, that we will continue the discussion and reading some of his books and discussing them. So let's welcome Raju to Palestine, Bire in particular.
This can be used for
Yeah.
people who ask questions. Well, thank you very much. And I am extremely happy to be here in Palestine. Basically because you are fighting for freedom, and so am I. So it's always good to be among people who have similar kinds of objectives. And I understand that this group is specifically for decolonization. We have been working on it quite a bit in Malaysia. Penang, we had this conference on decolonization, decolonizing our universities. There's a big discussion about it, which is archived on my blog, and which also disturbed the West. So it also reached the West. Some people commented, then I commented back. And there is a volume that came out, which was edited by Claude Alvarez and Shad Faruqi on decolonizing our universities. Are you familiar with it?
No.
So this was there. There's a big discussion of it across.
We're not talking about Ismail al-Farouqi.
No, Shad Faruqi is a lawyer. Yeah, not Ismail. So this is a volume on decolonizing, and this is going on. There's a big network. We did this in Iran, ending academic imperialism. There was a conference. So probably, if you like, you can see my paper on that. Not the video. There is a whole paper. And that sort of explains this whole strategy of colonization. So maybe let me start with this newspaper article which came out based on my talk in Birzeit University, which looks at this issue of the Param supercomputer. So I worked on it. I had to build it. That seems to somehow add to my credibility. So I just wanted to take a look at that to see what does this kind of technology represent. It represents hard power. And the one thing that I learned by working on this project was that this technology gap that people are so worried about is very insignificant. Because when we started the project, I was the first person to join. Knew nothing about parallel supercomputing. Nobody knew anything. Those days, this was 1988. India was not known for computing. India was known as the land of snake charmers and so on at that point of time. So it was, it looked like a very formidable task. How do we build the machine? How do we port applications of national importance? You know, space, you want to have maybe real-time missiles, whatever. Oil, scientific applications, weather forecasting, all sorts of things like that. How do you port it all? And parallel computing is today in your telephones. It is there in all these processors. When you have a quad-core processor, for example, it's a parallel processor. So it doesn't automatically make your phone faster. That's just a wrong belief. You have to work to make it faster. But the point is, we did the whole thing in 3 years. And we drove the Cray supercomputing company. US had this company. We drove it out of business. They started giving their machines away for free. This project started because the Cray was not made available to us. Because they said it's a supercomputer, it can be used for defense purposes and so on. And when it was finally made available, it was under very humiliating conditions. And so somebody said that for the cost of that, which was about $25 million, we can build our own machine, we can build our own technology, which we did. So the point is, this technology gap is very insignificant. In fact, if you look at when the colonial project started, so let's go back to the 19th century. What technology gap? There was no technology gap. All the weaponry on one side was available on the other side. So this was a question which really bugged. I mean, this was the other kind of project which I started on, which was the project of history of Indian science, philosophy, culture. How is it that a handful of Britishers were able to rule such a vast country like India? It was not a wealth disparity. The Britishers were there to become rich. They were extremely poor. If you look at 19th century England, or you look at Charles Dickens' description of 19th century England, it was extremely poor at that point of time. Even at that point of time, despite the colonization going on. So you can imagine how poor they were when they came to India. They came to India because it was wealthy. So what happened? How did this handful of people manage to control this huge land, this vast population? What was the magic? And I think that's the question which you need to answer, and that's the question which you need to answer in Palestine, because it is important to discriminate between physical occupation and colonization. So the British went away in 1948 in India, 1947. They went away, but that was just the end of the physical occupation. The colonization continued. Our constitution is based on the British Constitution. Our education system is based on that, and the people who come out look up to the West all the time. So there is no real independence. So mentally we remain colonized, and that's the nature of colonization, that it colonizes you mentally. It is like training a dog. That's the word they use for Indians and for Iranians. Indians and dogs not allowed. Iranians and dogs not allowed in their clubs. It's like training a dog, that once you have trained the dog, you remove the leash, dog is not going to run away, it's going to come back to you, it's going to listen to what you say, you don't need a stick. So that is what I think we need to understand, much more so than getting rid of just physical occupation. And that is what I want to talk about, because that is, I want to talk about my experience. How much it is relevant for you, what you wish to take from it is up to you. So the way we understood it, or the way I tried to understand it, was something as follows, that if you look at the other dimension of what we are talking about, what is talked about in current US military strategy as soft power. That colonialism was all about soft power. And where did that soft power derive from? That soft power, see what is power? Power is the ability to make a person behave as you want. One way to do it is you point a gun like these Israeli soldiers are pointing all the time as soon as you enter here, and then say, all right, you do this, otherwise we'll kill you. Now this is hard power. You're pointing a gun, or you're forcing somebody to do something. But soft power is you make the person want what you want. So you don't need to point a gun, you don't need to do anything, the person automatically does it. How do you achieve it? That is what the education system does. The education system indoctrinates people from childhood, because what happens is a child does not ask too many questions. We tell a story to a child, child believes it, and then develops those habits. And then if the story changes, that's when people start feeling uncomfortable. So this soft power comes through the education system. And how was this education system installed? And I think that we need to understand, and that is what I have discussed in this Ending Academic Imperialism. It was not installed by force. The British were not powerful enough to change the education system by force. It was installed by deception. It was installed by falsehood. And that is what we need to understand. It was installed because Indians themselves asked for it. The British said, all right, we will put in money into building Sanskrit colleges and Arabic madrasas. Those were the two systems of education prevalent in India. And then Indians themselves stood up and said, no, no, we don't want these Sanskrit colleges. What we want is Western education. Strange, isn't it? And that's the logic that would be given today if you try to change the education system. Look, you want their science and technology. It is their science and technology you want, and therefore you must imitate. And that was also the logic given by Macaulay. Macaulay, who changed the education system in his Minute on Education, when he recommended this change, this is what he said, that one shelf of books in a Western library is superior to all the literature of the Orient, all the literature in Sanskrit, Arabic. I don't know about it, but I know this is superior. That's what he says. Immeasurably superior. Where? Especially in science, because others did not have science. So there was a story that was told. The story that was told was that science began in the West. And because it began in the West, if you want to become superior like the West, if you want to have science, if you want to have technology, you must get their system of education. So the system of education was supported by a certain history of science. Now the point I am trying to make is that that history of science is false. As a matter of fact, I would like to ask a random question. You hear about Greeks having done something and so on. Let us say Euclid. Euclid started off mathematics. Ptolemy started off astronomy. Does any one of you know any evidence for it?
Of course not.
It's a myth.
Evidence-less history.
It's a religion. It's a myth.
So the point I am making is that you tell a story, people believe it. And then on that basis you change your education system. And that education system changes the minds of so many people. And with that change you are able to rule a vast land. And that rule persists. That mental occupation persists even after the physical occupation is ended. And that is much more difficult to get rid of than the physical occupation. Because physical occupation, you can see the flag, you can shoot at it. Mental occupation is inside your mind. What do you see? What do you fight with? It's extremely hard to do so. So this is what I've said. If you want to fight, what do you need to do? The first step you need to do is to examine the history of science. See, if you believe science is universal, if you believe mathematics is universal, why do you believe only Greeks did it? That was the racist thesis that the West gave us. It is universal, but only the Greeks knew how to do it right. What a foolish thesis. I mean, you don't need any evidence, just common sense is enough. If it is universal, it should develop universally. If it developed only in one place, it is culturally specific, it is culturally loaded. Why do you need it? Does it serve your purpose? It's just common sense. You don't need to go beyond common sense. I mean, you look at the evidence and so on. I've looked at it in great detail, but that is a secondary thing. On the face of it, the claim is so nonsensical. Just on the face of it, that you should demand evidence, but you did not demand evidence. That is the point about mind capture. In fact, to come back to the newspaper report, I said in my talk at Bezet University that this is all false. But the newspaper report didn't dare to say that. If they say that, then maybe people will laugh. You think of the fear in the mind. It's just a report, right? Maybe I said something wrong, they can at least report that this guy came and said it is all false. He has given a prize of $3,300 for evidence. The prize has been standing for so many years. He has written all this. Nobody has contested it in the last 15 years. Nobody is able to contest it except by telling some trivial lies about me personally.
Let me just هو بحكي عن حط جائزة موجودة على الويب سايت تبعه لأي واحد بيقدر يعطي أي شيء يأكد وجود إقليدوس، لأنه بالنسبة لراجو اختار يعني إنه إقليدوس اخترع، إنسان عمره ما وجد ولا له وجود وكل ما فيش أي دلالة، بس الكذبة مشيت لحد هلا ماشية. وفي مدرسنا بندرس إنه إقليدوس هو رب الهندسة وهو مبدأ كل هذه الشغلات. فهو حاطط يعني إذا حد عنده أي دليل إنه إقليدوس موجود باخذ $3,300 موجودة على الويب سايت تبعه.
This applies to almost all the historical facts.
No, not all historical facts. So you can, no. I don't think there is that kind of generalization. It applies to all Western history. It does not apply to all history.
And Islamic history.
Pardon me?
Islamic
No.
history.
You have, no. Let's discuss it one step at a time. Let's not generalize like that there is no evidence for any history. That is going too far, because I have evidence for calculus and so on. We'll come to that in a minute. What I'm saying is that the education system produces people who are mentally obedient to the West, who accept its authority, who are so frightened of its authority that they don't even want to say, we don't have the evidence, why should we believe? They don't even want to say, this guy is demanding evidence, he doesn't believe, they are afraid to say that. And this is what is being done everywhere. In my university, there are students from 50 different countries in my class. And I asked them, everywhere colonialism has reproduced itself in this manner. They have the same system of education. They come with the same beliefs. And then, of course, after the course, after 3 months, things change. So, this false history of science, I want to go into some depth. The false history of science is not universal. There is a specific way in which this false history was constructed, and I want to, in which the West constructed false history. So that's a tool of soft power, which others did not really know about, which they did not use, which they did not examine, which they have not contested so far, which they are afraid to contest because of their childhood training. The simple demand, if you are saying this, give me evidence, otherwise why should I believe the story? It's a very simple demand. So I want to look at how this false history was constructed. As a matter of fact, it was once church and state came together, it became a means of pushing the church. See, this started in the 5th century. Orosius' History Against the Pagans was a means used to glorify the church and vilify its opponents. Tell any kind of lie, doesn't matter. You go on telling it for 500 years, people will believe it. Because they don't check it, like you never checked any of the stories that you heard. Did you? So I want you to go back and reflect on that experience, why you never checked it. What made you believe it? That's the process by which the mind is captured. Okay, so this fraud, now this is what I am saying, because it did not somehow come out clearly. I am saying that the Western history of science is a fraud. How was this fraud cultivated? It was cultivated in various stages. Stage 1, you have the Crusades. So what happens during the Crusades is that you have an attempt to convert Muslims by force. That's what Crusades are. Europeans were converted to Christianity by force, essentially. Okay, Charlemagne and so on in his conquest, this was done by force. When this principle was extended, then force succeeded in one part of Europe, Spain. What was the Qurtuba Khilafat succeeded there, because it had already broken up into small pieces. And that was run over, and that is why it started, because they were so rich. It wasn't just an issue, it's always an economic motive involved. So this happened, and then, but force failed subsequently. Jerusalem was conquered once, but they could not hold on to it. So what was the technique available? So one of the techniques available was to get the knowledge, because the Islamic world was way ahead. There was the dark ages of Christendom corresponding to the golden age of Islam. So at that point, during the Crusades, the library at Toledo came under Christian control. After the Crusades were lost, this library was mass translated around 1125. Now, how do you justify this mass translation? There's a religious war going on. You are saying that's the enemy. Now, for 500 years, you have been burning all books, saying that any book which is non-Christian should be burnt. Suddenly you change, say, all right, we are going to translate and we are going to learn from those books. How do you justify it? It needs justification, because it's a time of extreme religious fanaticism. How do you justify it? And that justification was given by saying, simple, just falsify history. That's the point, that there is a certain definite motive being served. And how do you falsify? You say, well, all those books, they were actually written by Greeks. And what did well, no other part of the world plays a role. India, China, all gone out of existence. It's 50% of the world population, you know. India, China, Africa, you just eliminate it completely, right? And as a matter of fact, in any library, you have books from all over the world. And it's well known that the Beit al-Hikmah, for example, imported knowledge from India. Paper making came to Baghdad from China, and so on. So lots of things came from all over the world, because knowledge generally accumulates from all over the world in any library. So this was all attributed to Greeks. Why? Always early Greeks, not late Greeks, because they were seen as friendly to the church. So it became theologically correct to translate it. That was our inheritance. They did it, and Arabs only kept it in safekeeping to give it back to us at the appropriate time. Now we have got it back, we are going to translate it. So everything was done by Greeks. Now that was at the time of Crusades. Today, you ask, what will happen? You want to know how something began. Okay, how did people discover that the earth moves or whatever? You will Google, right? And where will Google take you? Wikipedia. So Google will take you to Wikipedia. What will Wikipedia say? Wikipedia will give you a long story about how Greeks did this. Then it will say, but there is very little evidence for it. That very little evidence comes from one remark in the 5th century. Which is not true actually. Because that remark doesn't come from 5th century, it actually comes from 16th century. It is attributed to somebody in the 5th century. That Wikipedia doesn't tell you, it hides. And in every story is like that. So when I taught this course on history, philosophy of science, initially my students did not believe what I was saying. Then they started checking and said, yes, you are right, there is a stock pattern. Always it's the same thing. There's a very grand story, no evidence, they'll say very little evidence. And then that little evidence turns out to be one little remark, and that remark comes from a 16th century Byzantine Greek text, which has no relationship to the time and place. Let's take the example, let's take a concrete example of Euclid. So today, if I want to ask where mathematics began, ask Wikipedia, how did mathematics begin? Let's say Euclid did it. Real mathematics began with Euclid. After all, mathematics is something common, everybody uses it all over the world. Must have developed in India, must have developed in China, but did develop among Arabs and so on, everywhere. Why only Euclid? Oh, he had something special, which was universal, but all these primitive people didn't know it was universal. What to do? Right? So then it will go on, Euclid did this, he did that, long description, you'll find the description in this book. Lots of very glorious description. But there is very little evidence. What's the evidence? About 10, 12 years ago, I was discussing in a mailing list called Historia Mathematica, and somebody mentioned Euclid's division algorithm. I said, what are you talking about? There is no proof that even Euclid existed. How could he multiply and divide? He did not have those algorithms. The word algorithm comes from al-Khwarizmi. Al-Khwarizmi is Latin name, algorithmus. So somebody got very annoyed. Said, who is this Raju? What is he saying? And let some historian tell us what is known about Euclid and what is known about the book he wrote. So the leading authority on Greek mathematics at that time, on Fowler, he responded. What is known about Euclid at the present time? Guess what he said? One word, nothing. I said, no, there is no evidence. What is known about his books? He said the earliest manuscript that we have got comes from the late 9th century, which is closer to us than to the purported time of Euclid. It comes from another place, another time. So nothing is known. Yet, this is what you are told, this is how your syllabus is changed. When you learn the new mathematics, it is based on the reconstruction of Euclid by Bertrand Russell and Hilbert. So that history leads to a certain course of action. That course of action puts you in a position where mathematics is made so difficult that you don't understand it. And when you don't understand it, what do you learn? You learn to be obedient to those people who understand it. You learn to trust their authority. That's what you learn. So you are enslaved. If somebody says something, if I were to say Stephen Hawking is talking nonsense, you don't know what to say, because you don't understand his mathematics and you have to judge the authority. What is Raju's authority? What is Hawking's authority? Hawking knows what I am saying is right, but you don't know. And how will you decide it? So this is how you are put into an inferior position where even if you want to change something, it is very difficult to change, because you will say, ask the expert. Who is the expert? Somebody who has approval from the West. He should have a degree from Cambridge or Harvard. Then he is an expert. But if he has that sort of a degree, barring some exceptions, then he is bound to have a vested interest. And so he's not going to come with you. So this is how a few handful of people can control a vast population. This is happening in front of your eyes. If I ask people how is the mathematics syllabus determined, all school teachers, I was teaching school teachers last year, year before last. We don't know. We get a syllabus from the government. So I ask the minister, so I don't know mathematics. So the teachers don't know, the students don't know, the minister doesn't know. Who knows? It is those few experts. And they are controlling this vast population. This is there in front of your eyes, this evidence, it's part of your experience, which you need to reflect upon. Okay, this is how a handful of people can, through the education system, control so many millions of people. So this is just one example. There is no evidence for Euclid. All right? If you look at Wikipedia, it will say the evidence is not nothing, it is almost nothing. What is this almost nothing? One remark made in the 5th century by Proclo. How do we know Proclo made this remark? You see, story, when you examine, you have to check and keep on checking. If your Pistorius, Oscar Pistorius says that he just shot, he thought there was an intruder and he shot, you have to ask. The next stage, what happened? Let's reconstruct the events. This guy woke up, his girlfriend was not beside him, so he immediately, and the bathroom door was closed. What did he conclude? There is a thief in the bathroom. Right? What a stupid thing to say. And then he shot, and she must have screamed when the bullet hit her. But he didn't hear it. He still thought there was a thief in the bathroom. And he kept on doing it for 17 minutes. Right? So you have to just apply common sense. That's more than enough. When you have a story, the story can't be defended just by putting on another story. It is usually defended like that. You must check the next story. People don't. They are satisfied, okay, there is some evidence from the 5th century. No. That remark actually comes from a book. You can prove, I mean, this is what I have argued here. I don't want to go into the details. It's very clearly an interpolation. Because this guy talks about some citation by Archimedes. And that citation is a spurious citation which comes from the 13th century. The manuscript is on paper. Paper came into Europe only after the 14th century when you had these books became common. It came into Baghdad much earlier, but paper factories were set up much later. So you know it's a very late text. And so the actual material is coming from 1,000 years after Proclo, and that Wikipedia doesn't tell you. It's not reliable. And on the basis of that little bit of myth, your entire education system has been changed. So what will happen if you unchange it? Well, if you question it, there will be a whole, well, I'll just come to that later. Let me just continue with how this false history developed. One part was during the Crusades. The next part was during the Inquisition. People are afraid to acknowledge any non-Christian sources. So Copernicus copies from Ibn Shatir. He doesn't understand. Whenever people copy, they don't understand. He copies, but he dare not admit it because he's a priest. And his friend Sculptatus has been imprisoned by the Inquisition and kept in prison for 10 years. It's exactly like the Israelis. Well, I don't know which was worse. All right, just to imprison anybody without any charge, and it is up to you to prove your innocence. That was their policy. So this was the situation, and naturally people were very afraid, especially people who belonged to the establishment. They were afraid of this, and this practice then continued. It didn't just stop with the Crusades and the Inquisition. The racist historians, when the slave trade began, before that they were willing to accept that Greeks learned from Egyptians. But then it emerged that Egyptians are black. So the same trick can be used, that history makes you superior, so they said they were inferior, and the Egyptians knew nothing. As a matter of fact, if you read Herodotus, they all went to Egypt to learn because Egypt was the center of civilization and it had such a long history. But because they were black, and as a matter of fact, all the Greeks you know are from Alexandria. That is why this lady is black. Who wrote the Elements? Yeah, maybe you can just pass it around. You can't see it. So somebody told me, well, if she lived in Alexandria, as you know, is in Africa. So in Iran, we were having a discussion. Somebody said, well, just because she was from Alexandria doesn't mean she has to be black. I said, maybe so, but just because all these Greeks are from Alexandria, that doesn't mean they are white. And for so many centuries, nobody questioned it. In the school texts in my country, they are all depicted as white. Greeks means white. Yes, please. Your question?
No, I'm just asking
translation.
بحكي عن إقليدوس اللي ما في ولا أي evidence ولا أي كتاب طلع باسم الاليمنتس اللي ادعاء إنه هو ترجمه اللي ألفه باسمه، غير سوى جملة واحدة في كتاب ادعوا إنه موجودة بهذا الكتاب بالقرن التاسع عشر، وعلى أساس إنه كتبها في القرن القرن التاسع، إنه كتبها في القرن السابع. والقرن التاسع أصلاً هو في القرن الستاشر اللي ادعوا إنه يعني الكذبة بدأت في القرن الستاشر، مش حتى في هل منكم قرأ عزازيل على المخطوطات اللي لقوها في حلب، وإنه كيف سحلوا أمين المكتبة في الإسكندرية وبنته هيباتيا، يعني طبعا هذه صارت في 323 أو 24 25 لا أظن 330، وحصلت من قبل القصص اللي موجودين اللي كانوا يعني ولائهم لروما وللكنيسة في روما، هم اللي حرقوا المكتبة، وهم اللي قتلوا أمين المكتبة وقتلوا بنته، سحلوا بنته. هلا بنته هي اللي على هذه الصورة. هلا هيباتيا زي ما كاتب يعني عزازيل إنه هيباتيا كانت معروفة إنه هي رياضية وعملت كل الأشياء، هو بدأ أبوها فيها في قصة الرياضيات، وبعدين بنته اللي كملت. السؤال هون إنه مرات بيقولوا له طب كيف عرفت إنه هذه سوداء؟ يعني إذا كانت بس في الإسكندرية مش بالضرورة سوداء. بقول ممكن طبعا ما تكون سوداء، بس برضه هذا الكلام بينطبق على اليونان، إنه مش كل إغريقي بالضرورة اللي راح ودرس في الإسكندرية ورجع بيطلع دائما وجهه أبيض، وكلهم بيشبهوا بعض، وكلهم ما شاء الله شعرهم وتقطيع وجههم يعني كتير جذاب. وطبعا السود دائما بحطوهم، مع انه يعني الواحد اذا طلع عن جد بيلاقي السود قوامهم واجسامهم متكامله كثير اكثر من البيض في كل انحاء العالم، يعني اكثر مننا واكثر حتى من البيض اللي في اليونان. فالترجمه هذه مع اسهاب. ما بعرفش اذا كان حكى شيء ثاني اللي ضروري اوضحه. في اي شيء حكاه بتتصوروا حلو انه ما ترجمتوش او ما حكيتش عنه او ما سهبتش؟ عفوا.
Yes. خلي.
You are talking about the history of science.
Yes.
You are dealing with historical events, but at the same time, history itself is a kind of science nowadays. How do you? What makes you believe the stories, the narratives about Hypatia, for example?
That are?
About Hypatia, and not about Euclid.
Yeah. So if you read the book, you will find that when you say history is a science, you want to say that you go by evidence. There is no evidence for Euclid. So he's supposed to have written the book called Elements. Now, the book called Elements, if you see every manuscript of it till the 19th century says, if I write a book, my name must come on it. But Euclid's name is not mentioned anywhere in any of the manuscripts of the Elements. The name that is mentioned is that of Theon, who was the last librarian of Alexandria and Hypatia's father. So all those manuscripts say that it was written by Theon or based on the lectures of Theon. Then in the 19th century, late 19th century, some of these Western historians, they found a manuscript in the Vatican which doesn't mention Theon. So that's the original manuscript due to Euclid. Now, if you are willing to buy this kind of evidence, I am not. Okay? So there are a whole lot of lines which converge to it in terms of philosophy of the book, in terms of the timing, in terms of the archaeological evidence. So it's discussed in detail in the book Euclid and Jesus. So I just want to give a broad indication. You can find it also in this book, smaller book, which you can download, on the internet. I want to give you an overview, and then we can enter into the details of each individual case to whatever depth you want. I am willing to sit here till the evening and discuss it with you. All right? So let me give the broad picture first, and then we go into the details. All right?
Let me just mention, there is a very important book, Black Athena.
By Martin
Yeah.
Barnard.
I think this is, again, another book that we really need to have maybe in one of the libraries here.
But,
Yeah, so
excuse
Martin,
me,
yes,
just-
yes.
We are witnessing a wave of European self-criticism in dealing with the history of science too. A lot of studies that are coming up nowadays are dealing with the issues that you are putting forward. So how can we differentiate between the two projects, a project of pure critic of history and another project of decolonizing knowledge and history? And the other questions about, is it the problem in the education system or in the nation state itself that uses the educational system to its benefits? So if we reconstruct the educational system inside the nation state itself, we'll end up at the departure point. We'll be still inside the colonial domination system.
Okay. Now the kind of changes that are being considered today is just that because there is this intense resentment among Muslims about the way history has been projected, they want to give some slightly more room. But if you look at those things carefully, it is very superficial. What I am saying is something much more fundamental, that the very idea of Greek origins is false. It's contrary to common sense, and it is false, and it gives you a false picture. So I think that if you, the simple way to ask is that if you change history the way they are suggesting, is it going to lead to any concrete agenda for action? No. If you change history the way I am suggesting, well, this was not the author, there was some other author, would that it does lead to an agenda for action today. That's a very fundamental difference. Secondly, your point about the nation state, I don't see that, because I see, as I said, 50 nation states, students from 50 nation states who are all studying from the same Western text. Where is the nation state so far as texts are concerned? Where is the nation state so far as education is concerned? It's all following the Western model. So I don't see the nation state as any kind of limitation or as being able to do anything to change the education system in any way so far. Maybe that will happen tomorrow. But everybody is terrified. The minister is terrified, the people are terrified, the students are terrified, everybody is terrified of changing. They are even terrified of mentioning it, that there is a suggestion for change being made. So what is the source of that fear, of that tremendous fear? If I am learning something, I should know why I am learning. The student should know why they are learning. It should be publicly discussed. They will never discuss it publicly. It's always decided in secret. It's decided behind closed doors. Why are you learning this mathematics? I have been challenging the mathematicians in my country for the last 10 years. They will never come out in public and discuss it. So this is all, when you manipulate behind closed doors. You cannot manipulate publicly. And they will not be able to tell you publicly why you want to do mathematics the way it is being done. So let's come back to that. Let me come back to this issue of
Third.
of false history. I haven't finished. I said slavery, I said crusades, I said Inquisition, I said racism. So racist historians, and this goes very deep. If you see the book, you will find, for example, Kant and Hume. They will give philosophical justification for it, for this racism. A whole lot of Western intellectuals will give philosophical justification. Boswell. Say, why are you taking away from pure humanity? By enslaving the person, we are turning him into a human being. That black is not a human being. So you see, starting from Egypt, where things have turned around. And the same thing is done by colonial historians. Okay, it's a project of civilizing the world. And therefore what you are getting, and that is the same argument that is given today, don't take away this education because this education is what is civilizing you. You were uncivilized, primitive people, and now you are getting this, you should take it. And you don't observe the evidence that for 150 years, 170 years, at least in India, this education system has been going on, never able to catch up, just go on imitating. So from wealthy and independent country, it has turned into a poor and imitative country. It's very difficult to change. Okay, so let's look at what you have to do. Maybe you're not experts. It's a very simple thing. Don't believe unless you have evidence. Ask for the evidence. Don't accept a certain syllabus. If some mathematics teacher says this has to be taught, you say why? Stand up and ask. Why should it be taught? Have you done so? You need to do so. I think once people start doing that, why are you teaching this? Then it makes a big difference, because that's the first step towards freedom. If you are not willing to challenge people, you can never be free. If you are mentally dominated, if you are too frightened even to challenge people, you can never be free. And let me assure you, asking questions is much, much more subversive than throwing stones. Because you shatter the entire structure that has been erected, you shatter the entire soft power that has been erected, because those questions don't have answers. And I believe that this is the way out. Now let me quickly explain how, if you change history, will the education system change, for example. Yes. Yes.
I have a question. When do we stop asking questions?
I'm talking about action agenda. When do you stop asking? Did you ask? Did you start asking? Did you ask your teacher, why are you teaching me this? And did you get an answer?
No, but my question is, if we're going to question everything, then we're not going to learn anything. At
No.
some point, we have to stop.
Did
and
you
learn.
start? You have to stop at some time is when you have asked enough questions. How many 100 questions did you ask?
But how far do we go?
No, I'm asking first of all, did you ask even one question?
I did ask plenty. I learned.
You
plenty,
asked
but
once and you were told to shut up and you didn't ask again. Did you keep asking?
I believe at some point I have to be quiet just to learn something. Because if I just keep.
You're not learning something, you're being indoctrinated. That's the whole idea of indoctrination. When you are asked a question, you're told to shut up. This is what is good for you, you better learn it. If you don't learn it, there are all these other ways to force you into learning it. You can be flunked, your parents will put pressure on you, and so on and so forth. You can be turned out of the class, all kinds of pressures are put on you. You better do it, otherwise all this will happen to you. Right? That is the logic of the system. It doesn't answer your question, it forces you to do something. So what I am saying is, what question you are asking is very far off. When do you stop? I am saying, when did you start?
Can we comment?
I'll just complete, maybe we can go for the comment, right? So please do ask yourself, when did you really start? Did you persist with the question? And if you are afraid to persist with the question, then there is no way you can get freedom. Okay, let me pick.
They want some
Yeah.
translation.
This.
The question يعني بترجم من الانجليزي للانجليزي الفلسطيني. السؤال هو انه امتى بدنا نوقف اسئله؟ يعني الواحد بده يضل يسال يعني وين امتى بنخلص وامتى بنبدا نتعلم؟ فبالنسبه لراجو سال يعني كم سؤال سالتي؟ وما هي نوع الاسئله؟ وهل عمرك سالت معلم مثلا ليش بعلم الموضوع اللي هو بعلمه؟ يعني الاختلاف اظني كمان شوي بنقدر نعود نحكي عنه يعني
اتذكر ما سالتني هذا السؤال كثير. سالتني السؤال هذا كثير. انا استاذها سالتني كثير.
انت استاذ
سالتني اكثر من سؤال بهذا الاتجاه.
طيب هذا معناه بالتالي حلو يعني نحكي عن هذه الشغله.
Okay, I need 30 seconds more. So let's look at what happens. Now supposing my history tells me whether about Euclid or about calculus. But calculus was invented by Newton and Leibniz. Then what should I do? Then I should do calculus the way Newton and Leibniz did it, or the way it was done in the West. But if I change that history, which I have done, then we find out that the calculus developed in India. It developed 1,000 years before Newton. And it developed over a 1,000-year period, number one. Number two, it went to Europe for its practical value. It was taken by Jesuits in the 16th century from Cochin. It was taken for its practical value in navigation. You want precise trigonometric values for navigation. And navigation was the biggest challenge facing Europe for several centuries, for which they offered big prizes, and so they took it. But they did not understand it. They understood its practical value. They did not understand how the calculus was really done. they did not understand its infinite series. How did they not understand? Maybe I can give you a simple example. I can give you more complicated examples. They are there in my book, but I don't know your background. So I don't, the ratio of the circumference of a circle to the diameter, which is today given by the Greek letter pi. You know about it?
طه بالعربي.
Circumference to the diameter. Now, this is calculated using an infinite series. How? You write, for example, 3.14159, and this will go on forever. And there is no pattern which repeats. So this is an infinite series, 3 plus 1 by 10 plus 4 by 100 and so on. Traditionally, it is called Leibniz series. It was, of course, known in India before Leibniz, and as Newton said, Leibniz didn't understand it. How do you call him the originator of the series? Which is true. So this is an infinite series, and because, well, the great philosopher Descartes, he said that such numbers or such ratios of curved and straight lines are beyond the capacity of the human mind. Great philosopher Descartes. And as a matter of fact, mathematics was done very differently in India. How do you measure the curved line? You measure it with a string, flexible string. It's so easy. But the great philosopher Descartes didn't know it. And how do you learn it in school today? You have a compass box. All of you, did you take a compass box to school?
صندوق الهندسة أو علبة الهندسة.
Compass box, which has got a scale, which has got a protractor and everything. That's the ritual you are taught. None of the instruments in the compass box can measure a curved line. Right? So you learn it in one way, and therefore a curved line, rectifiable arc becomes very complicated. You learn it only when you do calculus at some stage.
Let me just finish that. النقطة اللي بحكيها إنه ديكارت ذكر لا يمكن مقارنة محيط قوس مع خط مستقيم. قال إنه غير العقل البشري غير قادر إنه يعمل مقارنة ما بين خط منحني وخط مستقيم. فبقول راجو ولد صغير بيقدر يجيب خيط ويحطه على الخط المنحني، بعدين يشد الخيط ويقيسه على الخط على المسطرة وبيعرف الطول. فيعني هالقد بسيطة الحكاية. لكن بالنسبة لديكارت لأنه عم بفكر بس في الميتافيزيكال ليفل، إنه بيقدرش يعملها ميتافيزيكلي، معناه مستحيلة على العقل البشري. بتصور هذه الناحية كتير كتير هامة، وبرضه بتجاوب يعني بعض الأسئلة إنه بدنا نسأل ليش قال هيك؟ في حدا عمره قال لنا إنه عن ديكارت إنه قال هيك، إنه مستحيل تقارن خط منحني بخط مستقيم. طبعا نعتبره إنه كمان هو اللي عمل الهندسة التحليلية واللي عمل مش عارف إيش، وأنا أشك فأنا موجود، والله عنده لا هو موجود ولا هو
هذا لازم أقول كمان.
عفوا
لا لا.
So, because of the bad history, you learn mathematics in a bad way. But now when we change the history, we say actually calculus developed in India, it developed in a very simple way because it was being used to solve certain practical problems related to navigation, related to the calendar, related to astronomical models and so on, which is related to the agriculture. Calendar is very deeply related to agriculture in India. Very practical application. So then you learn it in another way. And now when you say see the history has changed, that this actually was transmitted from India to Europe, and Europeans didn't understand it. They misunderstood it, not only like Descartes but also like Newton. It wasn't only Leibniz who didn't understand the infinite series. The same critique applies to Newton. Not only was he the second inventor, he didn't understand it. So he introduced something called fluxions. None of you has heard of fluxions. And you study limits and so on and so forth. So the point is that you copy, but you don't have to copy their mistakes. Why are you copying their mistakes? Because they did not have any knowledge system. What was their decimal place expansion was introduced by Simon Stevin in the 17th century. Europeans were very primitive in arithmetic. Greeks were very primitive. Romans were very primitive. You cannot multiply and divide with Roman numerals. And they got these Arabic numerals from Qurtuba in the 10th century. And they made such foolish mistakes because they had a system of what you call abacus. They are counters. If you understand Roman numerals, there's an example given here. Take a look at it. So Roman numerals, do you know how to divide with Roman numerals? Anybody knows? You know how to multiply with them? So if I want to multiply, this is an example I give to my students. If you want to multiply 84 by 17, you have to add 84 to itself 17 times. It's a very complicated process, which any child can do mentally today with the algorithms or the algorithm. So this took a long time for people to understand. Likewise, calculus was not properly understood. The point is not clear to you. Maybe I'll explain it after some time. All I'm saying is that if you understand this, that they made mistakes, then those mistakes also creep into science. Newton's mistakes about the calculus creep into Newtonian physics, which has to be changed because all your science is constructed on top of the mathematics. So if you change the mathematics teaching, you also change the science teaching, and this is what I suggested in the decolonization conference, decolonizing math and science education. Why particularly math and science education? Because if you recall Macaulay's argument, it is for math and science education that you need Western education. Other things, okay, poetry you may have, literature you may have, but math and science. So that's what you need to decolonize in order to decolonize the pull of the system. And this is what the whole point is, that if science is not of Western origin, why are we talking about it? It's not identity politics, it's not chauvinism, it's an agenda for action. If it is not of Western origin, then you don't have to imitate them. Why should you imitate them? You should understand what you're doing. If you don't understand what you're doing, that's not called education, that's called indoctrination. If you didn't understand the mathematics you did, you just believed it, you did something that you were told. If you didn't understand the history, that's not education. You are being taught to imitate, you are being taught to accept authority, and that is what you have to challenge with questions. The very act of challenging is a very liberating act. So how long do you go on questioning? Until you are free. Thank you.
طيب خلينا نشوف كم شخص عنده أسئلة حتى نعرف نظبط الوقت يعني. أي سؤال؟
From what I understood, most of what we know is not right, or it's not the truth, because of West, they change it for their best and for them to be superior, and they are always right, and so on. So if most of what we learned is wrong, how can we know? I understood that we should not believe and we should keep asking, but when, how, or from where we can get the true information, or what are the resources that we know that this resource I can trust, or it's the truth, or what also about your information. I'm wondering about your resources.
Yes. So the standard thing that you trust is empirical evidence, the evidence of your senses. It may be fallible, but that is the first thing you should trust. Tajurba, pratyaksh, that is the traditional means which accepts that as the first principle. If you start by trusting Western authority, you are lost. If you say my experience doesn't count, I believe in the Higgs boson not because I experience it, but because somebody in the West spent $4.5 billion on it, and you don't understand the theory, you don't understand what has been done, you just trust it.
Okay, but it is based on experiments.
No, how do you know what experiments were performed on the Higgs boson? You didn't perform the experiment. You only believe they performed. They show you one photograph at the end of the day, and you do not understand quantum field theory of the Higgs boson. You do not understand how infinities are manipulated. You do not understand how the theory links to the thing. There is a talk of God particle, and you accept it. Right? So they performed an experiment. They went through some ritual. All right. Now at the end of the ritual, what have you even? I mean, you take a look even at a bubble chamber, something like an electron. Okay, that is hard enough. Higgs boson is, it's very, very, so many layers after layers of theory. Manipulation of infinity in quantum field theory. Well, I'll come back to that. Let me answer the question. Okay, there's a ritual. You are trusting that ritual. Okay, you're believing it. So that is not belief in, if you see, can you see the Higgs boson? All right. If you could see it, it would be something, that would be evidence of senses. But that's not the case. So that is the first thing that you need to rely upon, and not on authority. So are you prepared to do that? Or do you start with the story? Because this is what happens. This is the point of implanting a story is, you did not question the story all these years. But when the story is challenged, then you ask for evidence.
I will try to squeeze more, but you are telling us another story.
Yes, so you want the evidence for that. The evidence is there in my books. So for example, if I say that calculus was invented in India, I can show you the book here. I have not brought it because it's a very fat book, all right, called Cultural Foundations of Mathematics. And I can show you the book here, I can show you the evidence, and I can see the differences when you talked about evidence. In this case, you have a chain of manuscripts.
We need to check all your references then.
Of course. How do you think? You think you'll get knowledge painlessly? At least I have worked, I have brought it out, it is there for you in ready-made form. You say, I don't want to read, I just open my head and put the knowledge in. I can't do that. Okay, you have to put in some effort if you want knowledge. If you are asking this question, I am giving you a legitimate answer. You can check everything.
قبل حوالي شهر حكيت هون مع بعض الشباب، بجوز بعضكم كان موجود، وسألت ليش منثق نشرب هاي اللي محطوطة فيها المي بقول صالحة لمدة سنة في بلاستيك، بينما لو حطينا مية في كوباية عندنا في البيت بأزاز وغطيناها بعد يومين نشربهاش، نكبها. شو السبب انه منثق في هاي انه هذه المية صالحة للشرب؟ فقط لأنه جاي من السلطة، فقط من شركة. أما الشركة كذابة؟ طبعا كذابة، لأنه أسوأ شيء ممكن تعمله تخلي مية في بلاستيك، أما تخليها كمان سنة بعدين تشربها وأنت مطمن، بعدين تطلع هون إذا يعني لسه ضايل يومين، هو بتقول لسه ضايل يومين، يعني إنه في بعد يومين تخرب. ما هي أنت أول ما تحطها في القنينة تبدأ تخرب، تبدأ يعني تتلوث، وبتقعد سنة، وطبعا كل هالمكتوب هون هو اللي بخلينا نثق. فالقضية هي بس كثير
يعني
بس كثير مرة يعني حتى يعني خاصة هلا الطعم ما بدل على يعني مرات طعم السم زاكي، وريحة يعني لاحظي هذا اللي البخاخة اللي بنحطها في الحمام مثلا، اللي مفكر انه صارت الريحة حلوة بتقول يا بيي بحلاها، بس هذه فيها سموم، فيها سموم. إذا الطعم زاكي ولا الريحة زاكية هذا لا يعني انها يعني سليمة او صالحة للشرب. اللي بدي اقوله انه بنعيش يعني في عصر، وهذه بتصور النقطة اللي عم بركز عليها راجو في الرياضيات بشكل خاص والعلوم، عم نعيش في عصر عم بنضحك علينا في كل لحظة، والطريقة الوحيدة نحمي حالنا هو نعاود نعيد النظر وقدر الإمكان نعيد مصادر، مش بس مصادر المعرفة، أيضا مصادر المي، مصادر الأكل، عملية.
I don't know what he said in Arabic, so I cannot respond to what he said. I will just go back to the question that you raised. See, there are simple rules of evidence. First of all, things like primary sources. All right, if you are looking at textual evidence, where does your primary source come from? If your primary source is a 16th century Byzantine Greek text, then it's a big leap of imagination to connect it to what happened earlier. Do you have a continuous chain of sources? So, the very simple rules of evidence that you can apply. And the point is, before you talk about what I believe, first examine your own beliefs. Are your beliefs valid? I'm not saying you believe what I say. First examine your own beliefs. How is it that you believe so many false things which you just did not check, and which are influencing your entire life, and which are the essence of colonization? The essence of colonization is to make you believe all that, and then you believe naturally that the West is superior. That's the point. So that belief is on the table. If you want your freedom, you are not going to get it just by throwing stones. You are going to get it by seeing what is inside you, by emptying out the mental occupation. In order to do that, you have to ask this question, you have to check your beliefs. So why don't you please do that first? So look at your primary sources. Do you have primary sources? Look at the non-textual evidence, apply your common sense, and so on. There are so many things that need to be done. And these are all discussed. Now this is a very thin, slim book. Why can't you read it? If you say I can't read it, you don't need 2 lives to read it. You need 20 minutes to read it. All right, and then once you do that, then you carry on from there.
References and your sources,
You first read this and then think about it. So don't start with the presumption like she says, when will we stop, therefore we should not start. Okay, so you have a very logical ending for it. So first read it, and if you are not going to read, if you are not going to take any independent initiative, you have no hope of being free.
Excuse me.
You are not going to get freedom on a platter. Yes, please.
You are following the same. You are following the same way.
Which way?
The physicians at CERN Institute in.
Physicists, yes.
Yeah.
Mike.
You're following the same way the physicists at CERN Institute in Switzerland. They ask us for reading their papers, their documents about, let's say, boson Higgs.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you have a system of beliefs. This system of beliefs is used to capture your mind. I am pointing out that you believe this without any adequate evidence. And you are resisting examining the belief. You say, doesn't matter if we don't have evidence, we'll believe that. We are not going to change this belief under any circumstances. We will not check it out because the process of checking it out is too difficult. You have to ask a question. You have to read a book. Why should we do that? If you don't do that, you have no hope of being free. So I am first asking you to check what is inside your head. I am not asking you to believe anything. And this is only an aid to help you ask the questions. I am not saying believe Higgs boson exists, believe this exists, believe that exists. Why do you believe what you believe? Why do you believe Newton invented the calculus? Why do you believe that Euclid did something special? Why do you do mathematics that way? Have you ever questioned that? And if you have not started the process of questioning, that is how your mind is captured. All right, that is the point that I am making. First, free your mind. You don't have to believe anything that I say. I never ask anybody to believe anything that I say. All right. I am not saying you believe it because I spent $4.5 billion. I don't have $4.5 billion to spend. All right. So
There is a question there.
yes, please.
I have a question. So you're questioning the Western appropriation of all of these, let's say, sciences. So you're questioning the origin of these sciences. You're saying it goes back to Muslims or Indians or whatever. My question is there any, is it just the origin and who did it, or is there any differences in the rationality, in the tools, in the methods of how to think about things?
Yeah.
Is it just like it's not theirs, it's ours, but like it's the same rationality, it's the same evidences, experiments that we need to do in order to get this knowledge, or are there other tools?
Yeah. I thought I had addressed that question. Apparently it didn't get across. So, as I said, I gave you the example of the calculus. The point is not that Indians did it, the point is that Europeans misunderstood it, therefore you have to learn it differently. So not only was it done in a different place, it was done differently. Let me take the example of Euclid and Hypatia, which is easier to understand. So, according to the story, Euclid did it, all mathematics was about deductive proofs. And the story is complete nonsense because the first proposition of the elements uses an empirical proof. And it is so laughable that the West for 700 years didn't notice this. And it is even more laughable that we never questioned any of that when the book is in front of us. All right, it is even more laughable that we trust their authority and don't check it out. Now, when they did check it out, they changed it. So what did Russell and Hilbert do? Say for 700 years they had this myth that the book is about deductive proofs. And then finally they noticed that the first proposition does not have a deductive proof. I mean, it is, to my mind, I find it just amazing. How can people be so stupid that for 700 years they don't see this? But having found that, what did they say? What did Russell say? They said, well, our story is right. It's the book that is wrong. Euclid made a mistake. We know about what Euclid was, what his intentions were. Of course, there is no evidence. But the book itself is wrong. He didn't execute his intentions properly. So the right thing to do is to change the book to fit the story. So rewrite the book. And they rewrote the book in their respective tracts called Foundations of Geometry. And therefore, today when you are taught the new math, or you are taught what is called the SAS postulate. Do you remember any of you side angle side postulate in school? Yes, in school when you learn geometry. Geometry, side angle side postulate. Yes? Some of you remember?
العين والزاوية.
Never mind, this is what they did, this is how they changed the book, and they turned the critical empirical propositions in it into postulates. So what is the technique? The technique is one of metaphysical deduction, whereas that was never the case elsewhere. So if you change, you allow empirical proofs in mathematics. If you allow empirical proofs in mathematics, the whole thing falls apart. That's one aspect. The second aspect is that metaphysics is religiously biased. Not only does it teach you something wrong, it inculcates a religious bias in you because it says that those empirical proofs are inferior. That's the first thing everybody learns. Oh, deduction is superior to induction. So what are the traditional means of learning? All systems of Indian philosophy will accept empirical means of proof. You say they are inferior. Therefore, all systems of Indian philosophy are inferior. They are never taught. So when you accept the empirical as a method of proof, it will change, for example, quantum field theory. It will change the nature of the Higgs boson. Now, if you want, you can look at my paper on distributional matter tensors and relativity. It's in the appendix, and you will find what happens in quantum field theory, what is done. He's not paying attention. Never mind. So, well, I was saying that you could take a look what will happen if you accept empirical as a means of. This is one example. One example in the case of Euclid. Similar things will happen in the case of calculus. So what is the difference? If you eliminate all that bad metaphysics, math becomes so easy. So I am able to teach calculus in 5 days. I have taught it in 3 countries with so many groups, with about 7 groups now. And what is the test of learning? That you take any of those fat calculus books, you draw a question paper at random. And I have literally done it, drawn at random, well, pseudo-random numbers. I have drawn at random from question bank and given that as a question paper, and the idea is that the student should be able to solve it. They are able to do it. Alright, so the reports are published, so you can take a look. So there are lots and lots of things that come in. I mean, religious bias I can explain in a very simple way. Look at Newton's laws. That's the first lesson you learn in science. Newton's laws of motion. Alright, Newton's laws of motion. Why should there be laws? Why should there be laws of nature? What kind of science is it to say there are laws of nature? How do you know there are laws of nature? Can you refute the belief in eternal laws of nature? So it's not science. It's a belief. What kind of a belief is it? It's a theological belief. Who came up with it? Aquinas came up with it. It was part of Aquinas' crusading theology that God rules the world with eternal laws of nature. And then what is done? Because of this religious bias, you find people writing that Islam is backward in science because beliefs in Islam are contrary to science. Islam does not believe in laws of nature. So this was published, for example, in Guardian, but it's a long-standing critique. Maybe you can download my paper on Islam and science. How is the belief in laws of nature falsifiable? Please tell me. The belief in eternal laws of nature, how is it falsifiable?
All the science theories that are developed in physics,
my dear sir,
biology are falsifiable.
My dear sir, my question is, you have a belief that there are laws of nature, eternal laws of nature. Alright, can you tell me how I should falsify this belief? The belief in eternal laws of nature.
No, this is like the nature of science.
بس لحظة في كمان سؤالين. لا لحظة. لا إذا ممكن بس خلينا نسمع كمان بعض الأشياء بس حتى نوسع النقاش.
No. So, no. If, wait a minute. Have you understood the question? The point is not about particularly Newtonian physics. We know Newtonian physics is false. Forget about it. But the belief in laws of nature, the belief that in nature there are laws which you can find out. How do you know there are such laws?
Because we use these laws.
We don't. Newton's laws are false.
Lots of times, and they give us correct.
No. That's not the way. That's not the way. That is an inductive. You want to know how to prove it false. What experiment should I perform which will show me that there are no eternal laws of nature, or that the belief in eternal laws of nature is false? He said it's falsifiable.
there is
What
no,
experiment should I perform?
no, because there is no evidence on that to start with. There is an empirical evidence based on samples.
Eternal laws of nature is a theological superstition.
You're right, of course.
All right,
That's
there is
true.
no way to falsify it that I know of.
Falsify
You mean-
the
How?
belief, you mean? No, there is
The belief that there are eternal laws of nature which you are finding, there is a final theory, there is string theory, there is something. How do I know? You give me one example of an eternal law of nature.
There
One
is-
example.
For
There is
example,
no laws of
for
nature.
example.
What is there?
One
There is
example.
nothing.
There is nature.
Fine.
There is
There can
nature.
be habit, there can be nature, there can be creativity, there can be production. That is in fact what Al-Ghazali says.
There is nothing.
He says that there is creativity. Allah can create the world next moment whichever way He likes.
That's the meaning.
I
But-
believe
but-
I can do whatever I like at the next moment to a limited extent.
But you are inside the Western box. You're not outside the Western box. When you say, even if you cite Al-Ghazali, it's right now we are in the paradigm shift in chaos theory and complexity theory, and this is the complexity theory affirms the concept of emergence. So we are not outside
No.
the Western concept of science.
No, that's not true. Complexity theory does not touch anything so far as physics is concerned. I have a new physics. All right, I have a new physics which uses functional differential equations of mixed type. There's
Okay.
nothing to, if you see my book 11 Pictures of Time, it has a whole chapter on chance, chaos and complexity. All right, so complexity theory has nothing to do with it because it is not touching your true creativity. It's not allowing true creativity. You cannot create order. You cannot diminish entropy so long as you are governed by differential equations. However, that's a secondary question. I am within the Western paradigm. He raised a point that it is falsifiable. And my point was that the belief in eternal laws of nature, how do I know they are out there? Aquinas said he knew the mind of God, and so he said God rules the world with eternal laws, and therefore there are eternal laws. And Newton believed it. So that religious bias comes in, and we are taught from childhood there are laws. Okay, so but how do you disprove it? How do you falsify it using purpose criterion? That's my question. Okay, it can't be falsified. And if you look at an example, anything you name Newton's laws are false, you know that in fact they are trivially false. So you name anything and I will show
But
you
you
how
are
to
beyond
falsify, how it's
Newton.
already falsified.
We are beyond Newton laws
Pardon
now.
me? No, Maxwell's equations. What do you want? General theory of relativity.
I want to ask you,
Let's look at what you want.
please.
Quantum field theory.
I want to ask you, the Europe people, are they captured-minded like us?
Pardon me?
I mean, we are minded captured with this science from the West.
The question was, I was trying to show an example of how religious bias gets into science. And you are taught science with the belief in laws of nature. And I am saying the belief in laws of nature came before Western science. It came as part of Christian theology, of the theology of Aquinas, which was part of the crusading structure. When the Christian theology was changed, he changed it. And he said God rules the world with eternal laws. That is not the belief in Islamic theology, that's not the belief in Hinduism, that's not the belief in Buddhism. It is specific to post-crusade Christian theology. It's not the belief in early Christianity. It has nothing to do with laws of nature, it's about love, it's a simple thing. Where did these laws of nature come in and become part of Christianity? So it has to do with state doctrine. Now this belief is passed on to you as science, and you are told that Islam is inferior because it does not believe in laws of science. All right, you are told this. And now what you are defending is that this belief is true. How do you know? How do you know it is even scientific? I want to know how you know it is false. That's the whole criterion of falsifiability.
It's the only thing in our hands.
No. The point is there is a religious bias which has been drilled into you. You have great faith in the West and you say, well, what they say must be right and whatever science they have is right. I'm saying all science is fallible. All science is bound to fail. So you can have models, you can have useful models, practical models, but to say there are laws. You see what Newton did? Newton thought he was a prophet because he was born on 25th of December on the basis of a wrong calendar. Okay, he thought he was a prophet and he thought that he had read the mind of God, that God's laws had been revealed to him. And so in his notes, which have recently emerged, they were suppressed because he said Bible was manipulated, his notes were suppressed. They have recently emerged, so there he cancelled, he wrote lek, he cancelled hypothesis and wrote lek. So he said, I'm not making a hypothesis, there are laws, the laws of God have been revealed to me because I am a prophet. That was Newton's thinking. And we respect it and we teach to students and there are laws and this and that. You have models. Models work, but you can always improve them. If there are laws, you can't change them.
لحظة خلينا بس نسمع غير أشخاص.
I am saying there is no law. In fact, if you see the, if you
think about that, give me one example of a law that we believe in.
هو بقول لك فيش.
that we believe in, I am saying it is false.
Then
Law, Newton's law of motion,
اللي بقول لك فيه
Newton's law of gravitation, and so on.
Okay.
It's just his point of view to that thing in the world.
No, I am saying that the religious bias in science is exposed by its very terminology. Is that point clear? That the very word laws that you are using, why should you use the word law with science? You say, I have a model of the real world. My model may be fallible. So many things may happen, but I say I have a law. Where did the law come from?
Words are not innocent.
Right?
Okay.
So that is the religious bias already. I am giving an example. I can give you such example in calculus. Yes. Yeah. So, right.
في كمان سؤالين خلينا ناخذ كمان let's take two more questions. Maybe you can connect them. السؤال
She has a question.
بس I wanted to translate the question. السؤال كيف إذا كان فهمته صح السؤال يعني كيف قضية يعني نرجع لموضوع ضد الكولونيالية بالنسبة لمواضيع يعني غير الرياضيات. مظبوط.
تحرير العقل من الاستعمار.
هو ينطبق هذا
My question is also related to what he also mentioned. You mentioned at the beginning it's about the physical occupation, physical colonial
mental occupation.
Yeah, and also the mental. Now, for India, for example, they finished with the physical, but there's still the mental. And then you propose that examining the history of science could be one solution as to deconstruct the narratives of colonialism. Now,
Not deconstruction. I don't believe in deconstruction. I'm not a postmodernist.
My question is it only about science, or it's also about literature and philosophy and other aspects, especially that old scientists were not only specialized in one aspect like physics or math, for example. They were specialized in many different things, and they could relate philosophy with space, with different sciences. Would you think about the other aspects? And that would result also in the question that you mentioned at the beginning, that the Indians are struggling in building the constitution. How does examining the history of science would lead the Indians to a result that they could build a new constitution?
Yeah.
Especially if we look at constitutions that are made by the West, for example, the Americans in 1600 something, they made the constitution and it states that all men are equal despite their race or color or and then we saw how much racism was done to the black people.
Okay, maybe I can first, can I answer this? I won't be able to take all of them together. Let me answer these two questions and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so the point was that I am pointing out specifically about mathematics and science because that is left untouched. Everybody understands that in social sciences you need to decolonize. Everybody understands that political theory you need to decolonize. But nobody understands that this needs to be done in mathematics and science because people have this belief that it is somehow universal. So I'm pointing this out specifically because mathematics and science were the key thrust for introducing this new education system in the 19th century. And unless you can get rid of that, you cannot vacate the other things. To come back to your question about the constitution, how will examining this help the constitution? Why was the constitution adopted? Why was the British constitution adopted? It's not just India. Okay, all the colonized countries, every country in Africa has a similar constitution. Malaysia has a similar constitution. So Malaysia, the judge needs to know British law, he doesn't need to know any local custom. These were the points that were made. So why was it accepted? Why was it accepted so broadly? Because of the feeling that the West is superior. And where did that feeling come from?
Math and science.
It came from this belief in false history of science. That's where it all started, that we are superior because we have, it was a pose. It was just a pose of falsehood. On the basis of that, we took a system without examining. Just as you took the math and science without examining where it came from. You didn't examine where the calculus came from. You do it because that fact textbook. You believe it. All right, every university in the world does it. It's not just India. It's not just Palestine. It's Israel also does it. Every university in the world does it. And that is what we are talking about. That's that state of mind that you, unless you start thinking, unless you understand that you are not inferior, unless you understand that the sense of inferiority is coming from a false history, only then will you start questioning whether this constitution is appropriate. That is the point, that if you understand you are not inferior, then you question and say, is this constitution good for me? Does it apply to me? Are these kinds of laws appropriate for me? Do they fit into my culture? What is right with it? What is wrong with it? Does it serve my purpose? Just as you do for mathematics, what is the kind of mathematics I am learning? Is it of any use to me? Now, people don't want to even ask that question. That's the problem. If you ask a question about the constitution, you are being anti-national. Right? So, these are the kinds of questions that need to be raised. And no, the awareness, all questions about everything, but unless you answer them in mathematics and science, you will always be told that, look, the West is immeasurably superior in mathematics and science. That is what Macaulay said, that unless you answer that, why should you change the education system?
Is it this way, or is it possible that through social sciences, if we are aware that they are not better or they are not, then we could also question the science. Why would it start from the science and then to the social?
You think the scientists will accept your criticism? They have the money. All right, and the state wants them because the state wants them. The state wants weaponry. It's the capitalist who wants them because they want the profit. They want the new systems of genetically modified crops and genetically modified medicines and so on and so forth. So that's where all the money is. That's where all the power is. And your social science critic, they will say, do you even understand science? How are you criticizing it? Colonization is about power. And decolonization is about questioning it, challenging it, and getting rid of it, vacating it.
Yeah.
So therefore you have to start from science because the thing started from there. That's my point. You cannot start from social science and critique it. People won't accept the critique.
Yeah.
Of course we are doing social sciences also. I'm not saying you should eliminate it. I'm saying that you must address this argument first in mathematics and science. Otherwise the rest of it does not carry credibility. Look, they know how to do statistics, so that's the way to do quantitative psychology. How will you change psychology and say, I want to talk about something else?
But they were related before, all sciences and social sciences were related before. Now,
Were related before, once upon a time, in the days of Ibn Sina. Yes, in the days of Ibn Sina they were related. I agree. And they should again be related. That also I agree with you. The point is how to bring it about. No, I agree with you. But how to bring it about? What's your practical agenda? What's your path? That's my question.
ابدا من اخر شيء انتهى فيه الدكتور اللي هو فكره المعجزه الاغريقيه، يعني فكره السرديه الاوروبيه اللي انبنت على فكره المعجزه الاغريقيه، انه العقل هو الاساس وبالنهايه كل التفصيلات هاي مش ضروريه، بس هون كمان انه البروفيسور اشار انه في فصل انه اصلا اساس الفيزياء او قوانين نيوتن كانت انه تدخل ثيولوجي او ديني، بس هون اذا بتاخذ بهذا المبدا انه هذا بنفي كمان في مثلا في العلوم الغير اوروبيه اللي هي كان فيها مثلا الفلسفه بالداخل مع العلم العادي، مع يعني كلها متداخله، علوم حياتيه، يعني بمعنى ما كان في ديسبلين اسمه فلسفه له مختص بالميتافيزيقيا، وما كان ديسبلين مختص بالعلوم، علم مختص بحد ذاته او الثيولوجي، يعني ما كان في هاي التقسيمات موجوده، فهي التصنيفات كمان انبنت على فكره المعجزة الإغريقية إنه قدرة الإغريق إنهم يفصلوا ما بين فكرة الدين على حسب ما هو النقد وما بين العقل أو العلوم. فهنا كيف إيش الحد الفاصل يعني بالنهاية كيف إحنا راح نتعامل مع الموضوع؟
I mean, if I understood it right, he has actually three parts. One, that you are saying that the Greeks did not understand I mean, one thing you said that the Christians in Europe mixed theology with science, and therefore that was really the pitfall in science. Now he says that other than Europe, for example, in other societies, religion and science and everything were together. And philosophy, and I mean the whole thing was together. So why don't you see also that theology here did not affect it?
Interesting question.
Yeah.
Okay.
The second thing is that as he understands the Greek philosophy, is that they separated between science and religion. So what was why is that?
More secular at this.
Yeah, and they were more secular. So why are you saying that they have done more harm than?
Okay. So two questions I got. I didn't get the third part. So let me address the two questions that I got. You can come back with the third question later.
Okay.
So
no,
the first question is about why theology and science only in the Western tradition and not in other traditions where they did not even discriminate between science and religion as separate branches. There was only a theory of knowledge. So if you see what happened in the West, the issue of how the state and church came together. Western education system was designed for missionaries. It was designed to produce missionaries. The Western university system started in the Bologna immediately after the Crusades to digest all the stuff which was coming from Toledo. And the idea was to train missionaries to persuade others. And all the universities, whether Oxford, Cambridge and so on, they remained tightly under church control. At the time of Newton, his mentor, Barrow, wrote that the function of the college, Trinity College, Cambridge, is the breeding of clerics. Therefore, no dispensation can be granted. Every graduate has to swear an oath of allegiance to the church. And this state of affairs continued until the 19th century. Even in the 20th century, when oath of allegiance to the church, not ceremony. Ceremony you can have. No problem with ceremony, but you are swearing an oath of allegiance, you won't get married, you will stay this thing to the church, it's all a lot of big problem, not ceremony. Okay, that's why people wanted to escape. And Newton, of course, he was willing to stay unmarried. His issue was different. He thought the church was something very bad, which was very evil, which had changed the Bible. That was his problem. Now, when his papers came out in the 20th century, 1935, when he suppressed papers about how the Bible was distorted, they were auctioned. And some of these papers, some people tried to place them with the help of, never mind, that's not important, tried to place them in these three universities, Princeton, Harvard and Yale. And they all refused to keep it. They all refused to keep those papers. Why? They gave various excuses. One said a war is going on. This was around 1940. One said a war is going on. One said that these are not about science. So what if it is not? A history of the church. He had an 8-volume history of the church, which has been suppressed till date. So I said they don't keep non-science books in their libraries, and so on. So these were the kinds of excuses that were made. So point I'm making is that that material was so explosive even in 1940 that the major universities in the US refused to keep it. So that is an indication of church control persisting. Even today there is a lot of church control. Now that was not the case with education elsewhere. All right. It was not designed like that. It did not have such a concrete status purposes. For example, in India, people went to somebody's place and they learned from him the way you learn from your family or whatever. You go to some knowledgeable person's house and stay there. Or you have a local village community which is bringing up something and teaching people.
So the Sanskrit colleges, some others, there was nothing, the state had nothing to do with it until the British arrived.
So it's not about theology is the problem, or
No,
religion is the
theology becomes a problem because this theology is related to the state. Now, if the people who are coming out are missionaries, they are trained missionaries, they have to relate their theology to what they are learning.
Because as I understood before, if theology is a problem, then we destroy the legions of other people. When philosophy and philosophy wasn't a discipline back there. Science was physics, math wasn't a discipline.
Let's go one step at a time. Let's go one step at a time. All right, because if we jump too many things, then it becomes very difficult to unentangle the issues. Is this point clear that there was a special problem here? So when Newton talks of the laws of nature, he is being influenced by the theology. On the other hand, when Stephen Hawking talks of creationism, he is being used, or he is using science as a means to propagate theology. That is also part of the Cambridge agenda. Okay, because everybody trusts science, everybody believes science, that's what you are taught to do. So, and you believe that he is a great scientist. You don't know what he has done, you never read any piece of what he actually wrote in science. But you believe he is a great scientist. And therefore your beliefs can be taken forward to fool you in various ways. So you are taught that the world, cosmos, was created at one instant of time, at a singularity, and then there is a whole lot of other things that are piled on. So if you take a look, you will find that out. So there is a mixture of theology that is being used here in a peculiar way. All right? Number one. Let's go to Greek one step at a time. Okay, one step at a time. There is something peculiar happening here because it is being used for propaganda purposes. And the propaganda is affecting people, which is not the case in any other society as far as I know. Okay, that's the point of education here. Second point, you are making the Greeks were secular. How do you say they were secular? Let us look at the word mathematics. Where does mathematics come from? Where does the word mathematics come from? You're talking about Greeks. No, the Greek root is mathesis. And what is mathesis? Mathesis, according to Plato, is recollection of knowledge that the soul acquired in its previous lives. And this is demonstrated in the dialogue called Meno by Plato, where Socrates has a dialogue with the slave boy, and he shows that the slave boy has an innate knowledge of mathematics, and from that he concludes that the soul exists. He has demonstrated the existence of the soul by showing that innate knowledge of mathematics. All right, so this is directly linked to the soul. I don't know how you call it secular. If you see Plato's Republic, if you see Plato's hang on. If you see
they said.
I said they said and you believe. Okay.
There are three more people who really want to go. Faisal, there and here. And maybe we should, after that, stop. Now, I know I'm not translating everything that really needs to be translated, but I think the time is a little bit tight. And what we can do is, those who are interested, and we can read maybe this book or another, but this one is probably a good start. We can read it and meet again, let's say in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, who want really to follow the discussion that we have started here. I think that this is a better way of deepening. Also, of course, after we finish, if you have a particular question or something, you can ask Raju. I think
yes, you can send it by email or Skype. Yeah, that question has been there also for some time. Yes.
1, 2, 3, and then we stop.
I'd like to thank you for the lecture. I enjoyed it. I have a question about why do we need to decolonize? Is there a universal law that says that we need to decolonize whatever? The other question concerning the comment by Rina, when do we stop asking? She used to ask several questions. I used to teach her mathematics, econometrics courses, and regression analysis, and she says, why are you doing that? This is the first question. What the hell are you doing? Of course, math is an art by itself. But my answer to her was all the time is that you can apply it in certain, I give some empirical evidence to the utilization of such models, and such models can be applied. probably it should be the other way around. But this is how I used to answer, meaning that you can apply these models, which are theoretical models, which are artistic models, but you cannot be judged whether they're true or false. They can be judged whether they're beautiful or not. But when you go to the empirical evidence, there where you start judging things, if they are true or false, where you become more falsifier. So that's the way to go all the time, is to go to the applications. I mean, this is how we justified all the mathematics that we taught, that it can be used in she was studying it as an application to economics. Now, of course, there are applications to physics, to chemistry, to biology, to engineering, and of course, developments happened, and it went. I mean, we are driving cars, we are flying planes, we are using this mic, so this is all happening. So why do I need to decolonize all this?
Okay. So the first thing is that I need to be free. All right, I need to be free. And if this is the whole point about where the vested interest comes in, that there is a vested interest with a W that makes you want to defend whatever is being done in the West. So first, I want freedom. Why should I have any of this if it does not serve my purpose? That's my first question. So Constitution was talked about. Why do I need it? This philosophy of mathematics was talked about. If I throw it away, okay, let's come to the question of mathematics. It improves mathematics because I don't have all that junk metaphysics sitting on it. Now, the way you justified it using aesthetic reasons, I have told the people, hang on. Mathematics is aesthetics according to Plato. There is no aesthetics so far as in India we are concerned. It's about practical value. It came to Europe because of its practical value for commerce. Calculus came to Europe because of its practical value for navigation. All right, the aesthetics is talked about to justify the metaphysics. And I have told the people in my country that instead of taking money from the Department of Atomic Energy, they should take money from the Department of Fine Arts, which has no money. All right, if they are talking about mathematics as aesthetics, put it in the Department of Aesthetics. I have no problem. You teach it as aesthetics in the form of Western music. I have said it explicitly. I don't mind. All right, so if we are talking about practical value, let's talk about practical value. That's where the decolonized mathematics comes in. You don't have this confusion. If you are doing aesthetics, if you are doing a form of music like Plato thinks mathematics is, then do it in a Department of Music or Department of Fine Arts or whatever, with whosoever is interested at a postgraduate level. Don't make it a compulsory subject in school. What you are teaching in school, you are teaching for practical value. Okay, that's number one. Number two, that metaphysics of mathematics creeps into economics. It creeps into physics. That's the problem. All right. And well, I have explained that problem. I don't want to get into it right now, but you can take a look at my book on 11 Pictures of Time. And if you like, we can discuss it. And we are talking about decolonizing economics. Why do you want all that theory from Samuelson? Samuelson is one of the books we want to burn. All right. So, because the moment you start modeling things in a certain fashion and you get accustomed to thinking in those terms, then there is a big problem, but I don't want to get into this in too much depth. The point is that decolonization leads to better mathematics. It leads to better physics. And I definitely want that improvement. Of course, it leads to a better system of ethics. It leads to a better system of ethics because I don't have this kind of thing. I have a harmony principle based on the new physics. So maybe you could take a look at all that and then discuss it. Okay, so take a look at this. This is all available on the net. Take a look at the harmony principle. Take a look at retarded gravitation theory, which corrects Newtonian physics based on its error. Take a look at my thing on calculus without limits, and then we discuss it because it leads to something better, leads to something more practical. We started with that. Okay. So
there is a question.
Yes, please.
Yes, good evening to you. I personally, I completely agree with you, and I think the evidence that we need to decolonize science and history and narrative, it's all over the place. My question to you, how come there is not much of a great work in this area?
Not much of?
Great work in this area of decolonizing science and decolonizing the narrative. I mean, in our case, it's not just something for discussion, it's our life. If you look at our education system, the narrative of the occupier, it's already in our schools. So my question to you, why not there's much work in this area? And my second question
Not very much, yes.
But in this time, I think for me, we live in a very weird, unique situation where we still colonize, but we live in post-colonial time. Meaning, we have central bank and we have board of currency, but we don't have currency.
Yes.
You know, per capita, we have the highest police present, more than the British, more than the American, more than the Indian. We have 90,000 policemen, but we don't have security. And it could go in every aspect of our life where we really, the reality we still colonize, but the way we practice, it's like we in post-colonial. Have you seen any situation similar to that situation?
Okay, let me answer your first question. And I think the problem is not that there has been no work. The work has been there. Now, these are arguments which I have raised from maybe 1998, so 15 years ago. They have been presented in international forums. The first time I presented it in Hawaii in the year 2000, it was a big gathering, 250 people, and they were shell-shocked. But the point is that there has been no honest response. All right, there is no response, no debate, nothing. So far as the mathematicians are concerned. So far as others are concerned, they implicitly trust mathematicians. So in Malaysia, for example, this kind of thing started, but it becomes so very difficult if one wants to talk about calculus without limits. So first thing I go, there's, let's say, a meeting. So there are people defending the notion of limits, 25, 30 people. Now, at the end of the day, I ask them, do you know what a limit is? Can you define it? Can you define what formal real numbers are? In fact, I set a question paper. What is a complete metric space and so on? None of them knew anything. So there is this implicit trust in the higher authority of the West. And mathematics particularly is very authority conscious. So you decide mathematical truth on the strength of authority. For example, whether Fermat's last theorem has been proved or not, you decide on the strength of authority, you don't check it yourself. So there is a problem. Scientists are a little more open. Scientists are more open because if you are talking about this, they do see that there are applications and things like that. So that is one aspect, but then it is something which has to be taken up by people. It's not a fight which I alone can fight. You have to feel the need for it. If you don't feel the need for it, if you think you're very satisfied with what you've got, what the state of affairs is, then, which is what people are told, then there is a problem. Okay, math is universal, science is universal, why do you want to change it? We are comfortable, we've got, as you said, we've got this, we've got that, and nothing can be done better. Then there's a problem. So that's one aspect of it. So far as the Palestinian situation is concerned, certainly I have not seen anything like this. So I do not really want to say anything about that. But I do not agree with one issue about living in post-colonial times. I talk to the people in the universities here, they study exactly the same thing. And if you ask them, why are you studying it, they have no answer. So that is a hallmark of colonization, of the mind that you're doing this. Why are you doing this? Because we imitate the West. And why do we imitate the West? Because the West is superior. That part is not said explicitly. This is what is done everywhere. That's what we do. We don't know why we do it. We don't know how exactly we are going to benefit. That is a hallmark of colonization. Normal people know what they are doing. And they know why they are doing it. Exactly why they are doing it. If they don't know why they are doing it, there is a problem. So that is the only part with which I disagree. I mean, the rest of the situation, yes, if you have so many policemen, no security, I quite agree with that. But I don't see directly how, I mean, maybe you need to understand perhaps that your security doesn't come by having policemen. See, in India, for example, in my childhood, it was very secure. There were no policemen around. Because people looked after their security. You could rely on your neighbors and so on. Look, now there are so many guns pointing all around. I don't feel secure. If I have a gun pointing at me and that chap's finger happens to have a tremor, I don't feel secure. So policemen don't bring in security. You have to go back to your traditional system and ask how that security was there. So perhaps that's the relevance.
عندي أنا بس سؤال واحد قبل ما.
You have a question?
Just one short question.
She has a short question. Yes.
I want to see what did I understood today.
Okay.
The statement mathematics is a universal language that we used to hear for a long time. Am I going home today with believing that it's not true anymore?
It's not true. I just gave you an example. In India, empirical proofs were used in mathematics. In the West, empirical proofs are declared to be inferior. So how do you say it's universal? It's just universal becomes a normative statement, not a factual statement. I do this, it is universal, you better do it.
Aren't we lost?
Pardon me?
Aren't we lost now?
Of course not. We are not lost at all.
I'm lost.
No, no, we're not lost at all. Because if you see 2 plus 2 as 4, how do you prove 2? Let me go a little deeper. How do you show 2 plus 2 is 4?
What?
2 plus 2 is 4. You believe it is universal. Why? How do you know 2 plus 2 is 4?
I know.
No, no, that is an empirical proof. Empirical proofs are universal to the extent that anything can be universal. But how do you prove 2 plus 2 is 4 in present day mathematics? You don't show 2 fingers and 2 fingers. You're not allowed to do that. That's what you're taught in kindergarten.
هلا بعدين كملي معه على بس أنا بدي أسأل سؤال
No,
صغير.
no, it comes from formalism, Peano's axioms and so on, which most people don't know. So where is the question of it being universal? It's not universal, the underlying logic is not universal.
She will continue.
Yes, we'll continue.
But logic
يعني
is
my
not
question.
universal. Niche mathematics is claiming that logic is not universal. Logic,
Not
meaning
universal.
that if A implies B, B implies C, مش بالضرورة A implies C. That's what she's saying.
No, I'm not talking about the associativity of transitivity of implication. I am talking about, let us say, proof by contradiction. Okay, A and not A implies B. This is not true. To say that you are both good and bad, therefore anything is true, the color of the wall is pink. That is what binary logic tells you, and that is not true. It's not true in natural language. It's not true in quantum physics. It's not true with Buddhist logic. It's not true with Jain logic. It's true with one particular binary logic out of an infinity of logics. Why should I choose that and say it's universal? Just because some Russell told me I should believe it's universal. Just because Kant didn't know, he was ignorant, I should believe him.
بدي أسأل بس سؤال واحد إذا ممكن. في 218,000 طالب وطالبة حاليا.
That is also there in the Hawaii paper.
بالضفة الغربية، جامعات الضفة الغربية وغزة. 218,000 واحد. وال 218,000 أغلبهم بدرس شيء بعرفش ليش عم بدرسه، أو بدرس شيء مش عارف ليش بدرسه. درست أنا الرياضيات مدة طويلة وبعرف ليش درستها ولا غير درستها. طبعا جذبتني إني أعلمها، بس ليش يا ترى هذه المواضيع نفسها هي اللي لازم أعلمها وليش لازم أدرسها؟ ما كان عندي جواب. واللي أنقذني من هاي بعكس يعني الحالة هو اللي يرجع للتاريخ. أنا كانت لحسن حظ جنبي واحدة اللي هي أمية تماما، وكانت بتعرف رياضيات لا يمكن إني أفهمها ولا يمكن إني أدرسها عن طريق جامعة. فهي اللي نبهتني إنه الرياضيات تبعي ما إلهاش معنى. السؤال اللي بدي أسألكم إياه 218,000 شو اللي بالضبط عم بدخل في عقولهم؟ لأنه أنتم مريتوا في هذه المرحلة، وهذه بجوز الإشي اللي عم بحكيه يعني راجو. فكروا في الأشياء اللي مريتوا فيها في الجامعة في المدرسة وعيدوا النظر فيها وعاودوا كونوا خلطتكم الشخصية لوحدكم. الأستاذ خالد بس.
So that what happens.
طيب بشكر الجميع على الحضور وعلى النقاش المثمر والجاد والنقدي. هنالك تسجيل المحاضرة سوف يرفع على موقع الدائرة على الفيسبوك، تقدر تسجلوه عندكم إن شاء الله خلال 2 أو 3، وبنكمل النقاش على الموقع. I would like to thank you Professor Raju for interesting talk. وإلى اللقاء في لقاءات قادمة. يعطيكم العافية وشكرا جزيلا.
There are these 2 books I'm leaving here. You can read them. They are also available. Okay, so that discussion can continue.